We're going to talk about focusing on God in just our daily life, because our daily life is filled with lots of distractions and things that kind of pull us in different directions. So we're going to look at what it means to focus on God and maybe try and eliminate some of those distractions. And it's funny that I'm preaching on this because a month ago on this date, we were doing the dress rehearsal for the Christmas show. And for those of you that maybe didn't see the Christmas show, I played this character named Wally, who was always on his phone all the time. And so after the show was over, or during the show, when people saw it, they're like, man, you really didn't have to act much for that one, you know? And I'm like, ha ha ha, it's so funny. Then another person's like, seriously though, like, you're on your phone all the time, ha ha ha, that's so funny. But then like by the fifth person, I'm like, wait a minute. A lot of people are making like the same type of joke, like maybe they're not joking. And so then on Friday, like a couple of days ago, I told Pastor Rich, he's like, what are you preaching on? I'm like, oh, I'm going to preach on living a life that's like focused and not distracted. And he literally like leaned back in his chair and like doubled over in laughter. And he's like, you're preaching on that? You know, like of all the people, he's like, I'm going to pray that God works in your heart. And I'm like, well, that settles it. I am the Wally, you know? And it's like the old saying where, let's say if someone calls you a mule, and the first person says you're a mule, you kind of like, I can brush it off. Second person says something, you're like, okay, maybe, I'm starting to doubt myself a little bit. But by the time the 10th person says something, that's when you look around and look behind you and you see if you're leaving hoof prints in the ground when you're walking. And I was leaving hoof prints in the ground. And so on your app, I don't know if you know this or not, on your phone, you can look and see how much you actually use it. And so I went on and I looked to see how much I actually used it, and I was appalled. It was way, 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 way worse than I thought. I was shocked. And so I'm just sitting there, I'm like, that's impossible. Maybe the phone's lying to me, but phone, it doesn't lie. And so then I set the phone down and I started to kind of look at how I live my life and what I do in a day. And I realized like I'm I'm distracted. I'm all over the place. And so then I started thinking, I'm like, wait a minute. What if I have like ADD or something? Because that runs in my family. And so then I got online and I started reading an article about ADD. And the next thing I knew, I was watching a YouTube video on like funny animals. And I didn't even finish the article. And I'm like, well, I guess I answered my own question there, And so I'm like, well, that's something. And so, wait. What are we talking about? Oh, distractions. So we're talking about distractions and how distractions are kind of all over in our lives. And not only do we have our phone that like gives us notifications when someone texts or emails or Facebook message us or likes something on Instagram or likes a TikTok video we made or Snapchat or whatever it is, our phone is constantly vying for our attention. In fact, as Americans, we check our phone once every 10 minutes. So the phone's always going for our attention, but then on top of that, you have kind of everything else that's happening in your life that keeps you busy. You're trying to do a good job at work, and you're trying to do a good job at home, and you're trying to like take kids to soccer games or help them with their homework or take them to karate or to youth group, and then on top of that, there's all these decisions we have to make because stuff keeps coming at us all the time, or maybe there's like you're dealing with health issues, and there's the joy of figuring out medical insurance and bills, and there's all this stuff, and then you turn on the TV or the news, and you see that there's countries like lobbing missiles at each other, and the world, the climate, the world is like melting or something, and it's so much, and it's just coming and coming and coming, and we just get so distracted by all the things that are happening and all the decisions that have to be made. There's a thing called decision fatigue, where we have to make so many decisions. We're like, I'm making too many decisions. It just feels very chaotic and distracting, the world that I'm living in. And actually, the dictionary definition for distraction is this. It's a thing that prevents someone from giving full attention to something else or extreme agitation of the mind and emotions. The word distraction actually comes from the Latin word distractio, which means literally pulling something apart or separating. And so if you're sitting here this morning and you feel that you are getting pulled apart in different directions or you're separated, you are not alone. Because looking up Google searches and Ngrams, Google records every search that we ever make, and Ngrams records every word that is ever printed in literature. And when you look at it, in the last 20 years, people searching for feeling distracted or the word distraction has increased dramatically. We are bombarded with stuff, and so like we're starting to, I'm distracted, or that is becoming a predominant theme in our culture, in our society. So if you feel that way, you're definitely not alone. And not only is Google telling us that we're over busy, but our food is telling us that we are over busy. If you go to the supermarket, they sell bags of sliced apples. Okay, they said this is a relatively new thing, but they sell bags of sliced apples because it's like, I don't have time to slice an apple. I got to get a knife out and like cut it, and then opening a Ziploc bag, forget about it. I'll just pay 10 times more to have someone else slice the apple because that's like 4 less decisions I have to make and I don't have time. And they're like, well, these are selling like hotcakes. What else can we do? And they're like, well, let's take peanut butter and jelly and like put it and swirl it in a thing. Because I mean, opening 2 lids, that's ridiculous. That's asking a lot, you know? And then having to choose between the 50 different types of peanut butter and jelly, it's too much. I'll just get 1 jar and be good. And so what I'm waiting for now is like, maybe they will invent like a jar that has like a third swirl in there that's just the bread. And so you could just open it up and just start eating it with a spoon. It'll be great. Or no, a spoon's too much. It'll be squeezable. It'll be a squeezable sandwich. That actually sounds pretty disgusting, actually. But so as much as our culture is telling us we're overwhelmed, and even the food that they sell now tells us that we are too busy, the real tragedy is not just that we're distracted. Because if you could like take a step back from the situation and pull back the curtain and see what's going on behind the scenes, that's where the real tragedy is. Because what's really happening behind the scenes is that Satan is trying to do whatever he possibly can to distract you from the things that are truly important, from the things that are truly going to have an eternal impact. Pastor Craig Rochelle said this. He said, "Do you realize that your spiritual enemy and every force of hell is trying to distract you from living for the things that matter most? Every demonic force wants to pull apart, divide your mind, discourage your soul, disengage your faith. The devil doesn't need to destroy you if he can distract you. If he can distract you, eventually he'll neutralize you, or worse, you'll end up destroying yourself." So we don't want this to happen. I don't want this to happen to anyone in the room. I don't want this to happen to me. And so the question is, what in the world are we supposed to do when we live in a world that is so distracting and keeps us from focusing on what is truly important? What are we supposed to do? And so what I want to do this morning is I want to look at a very simple Bible story. It's only a few verses long, but it answers this question. Because when we look at this Bible story, we're going to see what it is that we're supposed to do. So everything that we've just described isn't what is going to be happening in our life. So we want to be able to focus on what God is calling us to do. And that passage is found in Luke 10:38 through 42. Luke 10:38 through 42. It says in verse 38, it says, "Now, as they were on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she went up to him and said, 'Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me.' But the Lord answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Now, the village that Jesus entered was Bethany. It's a couple miles outside of Jerusalem. Mary and Martha are actually the sisters of Lazarus, whom Jesus would raise from the dead later on. Martha is the one who went up to Jesus and said, you are the Messiah, you are the Christ. And she said that before Jesus had raised Lazarus from the dead. And then when Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem to die on the cross for our sins, he stopped at Bethany, and Mary actually poured expensive perfume on his feet and then wiped his feet with her hair to prepare him for burial. And so before all of that stuff happens, you have this story with Mary and Martha. Jesus goes to the village, and Martha says, hey, why don't you guys all come over to my house for dinner? Now, when I read that story, my first thought was one of stress. Because I don't know how you guys operate. Maybe it's the same, maybe it's different. There is no judgment. But, we keep our house relatively clean. Okay, so it's like living at home clean. But then there's like another level of clean of someone's coming to your house, okay? So I call that company clean, where you clean stuff you normally wouldn't clean and make sure, you're getting your house ready to be put on the market to sell it, okay? So that's there's clean, and then there's company coming over clean. Well, I was reading this passage, and I'm like, it's not just company, it's God. God is coming over, and it's he's gonna see the grime on top of the fridge, and so I'm feeling stressed for Martha, because not only is the company coming over clean, it's Jesus and all the disciples. And on top of that, I'm like, how much preparation time did Martha actually have? Because it's not like Jesus could call her on the phone or shoot off a text like, hey Martha, me and the guys are coming over for dinner at 5 o'clock. Remember, Peter's a picky eater, Nathaniel's a vegetarian, and Thomas is lactose intolerant, and don't serve pork this time. It was not a hit, and so I don't even know how much time she actually had to prepare for this. And so she's stressed. And I'm not knocking Martha. The truth is, you and I, we need Marthas in this world, okay? If you don't have a Martha, Marthas are the ones that make healthy lunches for the kids instead of just dumping a bunch of pasta in there and saying it's al dente, Marthas are the ones that pay the bills. Marthas are the ones you better have a Martha in the kitchen if you're going to pull off a Thanksgiving dinner. Because if there's no Martha, you're going to end up sitting on a couch eating Thanksgiving flavored potato chips, questioning every decision you made in your life that led you to that point. And you think it's not true, but look, that exists. Pringles Thanksgiving dinner. How busy are we as a society? There is 8 delicious flavors, though. I honestly kind of want to try it. But the point is without Martha's happy Thanksgiving, this is what you're going to get, We need Marthas in this world and in our lives. And for those of you that are Martha, I feel your frustration, because there's all been times in our life where we are working hard and we're frustrated when we see someone just sitting there doing nothing, they're oblivious. And so maybe we're washing the dishes a little bit louder and shutting the cupboard a little bit harder, hey, over here, stuff's happening, or maybe we're vacuuming and we're ramming the vacuum into the couch they're sitting on, hey, can you see I'm vacuuming? It's super frustrating. So I, in this passage, am not knocking Martha at all. And I want you to understand, neither is Jesus. Jesus says, listen, Martha, Martha, you're anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, and it will not be taken away from her. Jesus, he wasn't mad at Martha. Jesus loved Martha just as much as he loved Mary. Jesus saw that Martha was worried about a lot of stuff, and she was troubled, and she was stressed. And in the big picture, Jesus said, listen, I know dinner has to get served. I know there's 13 people in your house, but right now, there's only one thing that's necessary, and that is to spend time with me. And that's what Mary has chosen, and I'm not going to take that away from her. Jesus is lovingly trying to redirect Martha, because what Martha was doing wasn't bad. I mean, serving dinner for Jesus, that's not bad. Wanting your house to look good and be prepared when people come over, that's not bad. But in that moment, there was something that's more important. And Jesus says, listen, I want you to spend time with me because I love you. And Jesus is saying the same thing that he said to Martha. He's saying to you and I, he's like, listen, you're troubled and you're worried about so many things, but one thing is necessary. The truth is, most of the decisions that we have to make are not going to be between good and bad. Those are pretty easy decisions to be made. Most of the decisions that we have to make in life are going to be between good and best. So there's nothing wrong with having a smartphone. There's nothing wrong with wanting to work hard at your job or prepare a meal or checking social media or being on Netflix or watching a sports game or going to a sports game or taking your kids to karate. Or there's nothing wrong with any of that stuff. But the thing is, there's so much of that stuff in our lives that we're worried and troubled, and we kind of miss out on maybe the one thing that's necessary, and that's spending time with Jesus. And the reality is, remember that Satan is more than happy for you to settle for what's good instead of what's best. Satan says, I am happy if you settle for what's good as long as you don't focus on God. And that's what Satan wants. He wants you to settle. But the question is, are you going to let him do that to you? Are you content settling for what's good when God is calling you for what's best? I actually listened to a talk from a guy, Craig Rochelle, who's a pastor, and he had 3 points on how to change the way we live. Because just as Satan is trying to get us to settle for what's good, God at the same time is working in our hearts and in our lives to try and point us to what's best. And so the question is, how in the world am I going to diminish this voice over here that's pulling me one way and instead focus on what God is calling me to do? How can I hear what God is calling me to? How can I focus my life on what is best and what is going to last? And he had 3 points, and they were super helpful. I just want to share them with you because it changed how I look at my life. And the first one is this: in order to focus on what's best, the first thing that we need to do is we need to diminish the distractions. We need to diminish the distractions that are in our life. Diminish the distractions that are in our lives. Hebrews 12:1 and 2 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely. And let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. And so this passage is saying, listen, there's stuff that's clinging to you that's keeping you from being focused and running towards Christ. And you want to get rid of those things in your life that are keeping you from running and focusing on Christ. And since everyone said I was a Wally and I looked at my smartphone, we're just going to start there, okay? So smartphones, they're wonderful. You can do so many awesome things with them. But there's also another side. We don't talk about that as much. And that is, everyone's like, oh, Ken, you're always on your phone. Ken, you're always on your phone. And I'm like, no, I'm not. That's not true. And then when I looked, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is scary. You know, and I didn't think I was on the phone that much. And that's what most people think. In a recent survey, 82% of people, when asked about their cell phone usage, felt that they were not on their phones, that it was below what the national average was. They felt, I'm not on my phone that much, and they felt they use their phone less than what the national average is. And so the question is, what is the national average? The national average is we spend on average 5.4 hours a day on our cell phones. that's like 38 hours a week. Like when you go in and you sign a contract with AT&T, you're not just signing up for like minutes and data, you are taking on a full-time job. Like this smartphone thing is demanding. And then when you look at the average number of hours we're awake, that means that 32% of our waking hours are on our phones. And before we think, well, that's just the kids these days, they're, that's not true. Like, we are all equally good at spending time on the phone. We across the board, the boomers, millennials, Gen Xers, we all use our phones about the same amount of time. We just look at different things on our phones. And so, applying it personally to me, I'm like, I'm not on my phone that much because, I don't have social media. I'm not cool enough. Like, I wanted to sign up for Instagram, and Instagram's like, nope. I'm like, well, okay, that settles that. So I didn't think I was on my phone that much. And so I looked at the usage, and I looked at the past week. I spent 32 hours on my phone. 32 hours. I couldn't believe it. I was shocked. I'm like, there's no way. And so I was looking through at my usage, and it turns out I'm a news junkie. I spend a lot of time reading news articles or watching news clips, and I'm like, man, that is so much time. And there's also a video game called Brawl Stars that I was playing a bunch, I'll be honest with you. But I was like, so much time. I was shocked. And I'm like, man, if I could reduce 32 hours down to 16 hours, like over the remainder of my life, I would get 4 years of my life back. So literally I could just go into apps and go delete, 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 cut it down to 16 hours and get 4 more years of life to do something with. Like, that's crazy. And on top of that, as Americans, we watch on average 3 hours of TV a day. And so when you filter in this and then throw TV on top of it, like, no wonder why we don't have time to do stuff. Because there's just not enough time for all the stuff that we're trying to do with entertainment or our phones or whatever. And please, I'm not saying we're going to go in the parking lot and throw our phones out there and burn them, I'm not, I got 18 payments left. That is not happening, I have insurance, I'm doing it. I'm not saying that smartphones are bad. I'm just saying let's look at how we use the time that we have. Because I think that's something that's really important to look at. With my phone, it's with our phones, for me, I was stressing over the news because it's always negative. It's always negative, or if we're on social media all the time, or we're we scroll and we scroll and we scroll and we swipe left and we swipe right and we like and we unlike and we worry about people liking our posts and we like their posts but they don't like ours back and we stress over all of it and we get so caught up in it. But if you stop and take a look and just take a step back and look, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm scrolling away, swiping away, liking, unliking away, literally years of my life. And in the end, what am I going to have to show for it? Listen, your life is too valuable, your calling is too great, and your God is too good to waste your life being distracted by things that ultimately won't matter. Okay? Your life is too valuable, your calling is too great, and your God is too good to waste your life on things that ultimately won't matter. I really want you and I to think about that. Because Satan doesn't want you to focus on those things. Satan wants you to settle for good. I'm not saying smartphones are bad. What's so bad about Netflix or Hulu or Prime Video or Disney Plus? Nothing. In fact, Disney Plus has Baby Yoda. Have you seen him? Baby Yoda is adorable. He is so cute. And so, but the problem is, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, everything's right. No, there's nothing wrong with that, but if we're spending more time with a baby Yoda than with God, like, that's not great. That's not good. That's not best. And if we're spending 40 hours a week on our smartphones and 0 hours a week with God, spending time with God and in prayer, that's not good. That's bad. And we're not focused on what is best. And if that's the case, then we maybe need to start looking at those distractions in our life and call them for what they are. They're not distractions. What they really are is they're temptations. And in Matthew 5, Jesus says this. He says, listen, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it's better to lose one of your members than your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better for you to lose one of your members than your whole body to go into hell. Now, Jesus was not talking literally. No one thought he was talking literally. He was using exaggerated language to illustrate a point. He said, listen, if there's something in your life that is keeping you from a relationship with God, then it's not a distraction, it's a temptation, and you need to cut it off and get it out of your life so that you can focus on the things that are best. And when Jesus is saying, listen, you're troubled and you're worried about so many things, but only one thing is truly necessary. So we look at we diminish the distractions in our life, we diminish the distractions, and then the next thing we want to do is once those are diminished, we want to focus on what is truly important. Focus on what is important. Focus on what is important. And Proverbs 4:25 through 27, Solomon says this. He says, let your eyes look directly forward, and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left, but turn your foot away from evil. And in Hebrews 12, as we looked at earlier, Jesus says, okay, if we're looking straight, Solomon says, keep focused on what's straight ahead. What is straight ahead? Hebrews 12 says we're supposed to focus on Jesus. What does that actually look like in real life? Jesus says in Matthew 6, he says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. And so seek first is what it means to stay focused on Jesus. And so what that looks like is, okay, what's it look like to seek first in my day? It means when I get up in the morning, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to check social media. I'm not going to turn the news on. I'm not going to do the million things I have to do. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to seek Jesus first thing in the morning. Jesus, I got a lot of stuff I got to do today, but right now I'm choosing to seek you first. And then as we look at our week, we go to a week. How do we seek Jesus first in a week? We say, Jesus, there's so much stuff I have to do this week. I got this doctor's appointment. I got to take my kids. I got to do all this stuff. It's so busy. I got all these home improvement projects, all this stuff. But Jesus, I'm going to seek you first in my week by making it a priority to come to church and worship. I got a lot of stuff I got to do. My life is super busy, but Jesus, I'm making a priority to seek you first in my day by spending time with you, and in my week by coming to church and worshiping you. And then we look at our friendships. We say, Jesus, how do I seek you first in my friendships? And that means we look at our friendships, and maybe we have some toxic friendships. Maybe even we have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a relationship that is pulling us further and further away from Christ. And we say, okay, if I'm going to seek God first in my relationship, I need to put some space between me and this other person because they're pulling me away from God. Or if you are hopefully we have people in our lives that don't yet know Christ, that we have an opportunity to share with them. And seeking Jesus first says, okay, I have this relationship with this person. The most important thing in my relationship with this person, it's not that we love cars, it's not that we love hiking, but it's that I love them, so I am going to seek to share Jesus with them because they need to hear the truth. And in our finances, we say, how do I seek God first? We say, okay, I got a lot of bills I got to pay, I got a lot of stuff I can do, but I'm going to seek God first with giving to him first. When God gives to me, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give back to God. And honestly, when I first married Michelle, I was terrible at this. And Michelle was so good at it. And so over the years, she helped me to see that like everything is a blessing from God. It just wasn't a priority for me. And she's like, no, whenever God blesses us with something, her first thought is, who can we help? Like, how can we give back to God? And she's awesome at that. And it helps me out. And so we want to seek God first with our day, with our week, with our friendships, with our finances. Because if we're focused on him first, everything else will kind of fall into perspective. We're saying, I'm going to settle. I'm not settling for good. I want to focus on what's best. There was a tightrope walker that a guy was interviewing. He said, listen, man, that tightrope walk, that's scary stuff. Like, you're like walking across the Grand Canyon or walking across 2 skyscrapers, and if you fall, like, there's no reset button, there's no do-over, that's it. Like, how do you, like, get across, and it's windy, and how do you do that? And the tightrope walker said this. He's like, listen, it's simple. Before I begin, I find an object on the other end, and I focus on it. I don't take my eyes off the object while I'm walking. I don't look to the right. I don't look to the left. As long as I focus on my goal, I make it across. So we diminish the distractions in our life, then we can focus on what's important. And the last thing is this, is that we listen for the voice of God. Listen to the voice of God. Listen to the voice of God. If you've never opened a Bible before, when you open a Bible up and you get to Genesis, the first thing you encounter is this God who is speaking. He kind of speaks the world into existence. He says, let there be light, let there be birds, let there be plants, let there be animals. And he speaks the world into creation. And then after that, he continues to speak to Adam and Eve. And all throughout the rest of the Bible, God is continually speaking to his creation because he wants to have a relationship with them. And even though the Bible is finished being written, it doesn't mean that God has been silent for the last 2,000 years. God continues to want to speak to you and I. God can speak through his word, through prayer, through a worship song, through another person speaking into your life, through a message. Even God can speak through dreams. God is trying to communicate with you and I, but the question is, are we going to stop and listen? Psalm 46:10 says, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. God promises if we seek him, we'll find him. If we listen, he'll speak to us. If we thirst for him and hunger for him, we will be satisfied. And so we need to diminish the distractions and focus on Jesus, but at the same time say, God, speak to me. Speak because I'm listening. I want you to speak to me. And God wants to talk to us. God wants to have a relationship with us. And so whether it's through a worship song or a dream or someone talking to you or a message, that's awesome. And the only advice I would give besides listening is that God is not a God who is confusing, and he's not a God who talks in contradictions. And so whatever God is speaking to you, make sure that it lines up with what he says in the Bible, because he's not going to say one thing in the Bible and then tell you to do something opposite of that. Numbers 23:19 says, God is not a human that he should lie, nor a human being that he should change his mind. Does he speak and then not act? Does he promise and not fulfill? Whatever God is telling you in any of those things, it's going to be the same as what he tells you in his word. So that's why it's so important to seek God daily and spend time in his word. And so when you can hear God speaking to you through those other ways, it's anchored in what he is saying to you in his word. So just to quickly sum everything up, it's really just those three things. Listen, diminish the distractions in your life, focus on what is important, and then listen to the voice of God. And you know what? I'll tell you, it is a fight to do that. It's a fight to be Mary and sit down and just focus on Jesus. Even literally this morning, I got up. I got up, went into the living room. No one else was up yet. And that's when I was going to do my devotion. I sit down and I open my phone and I immediately go to like the news stuff. And I start reading the news for like probably about a minute. And then God's like, hey, Ken, what's your sermon on today? I'm like, oh, no, not today, and I was like, man. So like I shut it down and then I opened the Bible app. And if you have a smartphone, there's a Bible app. It's the coolest thing in the world. Like you can pick a million different devotions to do. Last year I did one with Nikki Gumbel. It was awesome. This year I'm doing the Bible Project where they have these cool videos that kind of explain the Bible like super well and then you read it. It's so awesome. Maybe this year I could look and be like 16 hours and it's all the Bible app. That would be great. But just I encourage you just to dig into God's Word. It's so important to sit at His feet and just listen. Warren Wiersbe said this. He said, what we do with Christ is far more important than what we do for Christ. It is vitally important that we spend time at the feet of Jesus every single day, letting Him share His word with us. The most important part of the Christian life is the part that only God sees. Unless we meet Christ personally and privately each day, we soon end up like Martha, busy but not blessed. Your life is too valuable, your calling is too great, and your God is too good for you to be busy but not blessed because we get distracted by things that ultimately don't matter. Focus on Jesus and let's make our life count because we won't settle for anything less than the best. Will you pray with me? God, thank you so much for your word. And God, distractions are everywhere, God. Like sometimes we see a shirt and we're like, whoa, that's an intense shirt, or there's a flickering light, or a microphone flickers, or my voice is distracting. God, there's so many distractions, even in this room. And then we go out and our phones are beeping at us, and we have to make decisions and pay bills and take kids here, there, and everywhere. And there's just so much stuff, God. And I just pray that we would put you at the top of the list, that we would seek you first, God. We don't have to throw all that stuff away. It's not bad, but God, we don't want good to take the place of what's best. And so I just pray that we would really focus on you, that you would be our number one priority, God. And I just pray that as we do that we would start hearing, if it feels like you've been silent, God, that we would start hearing you speak to us in your word and through people and through the music that we listen to. And God, that we would hear you speaking, we would get excited about the stuff that you're going to do in our lives when we pursue you and when we do the things that you've called us and created us to do. We love you so much, Jesus. Amen.
Hi, I'm Pastor Rich, and I want to thank you for watching us online. Feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel for weekly uploads or catch our live stream every Sunday at hessel.org. Be sure also to check out our website so you can keep up to date with the events and stay connected to all that God is doing here. And if you've been blessed by this video or other ministries here at Hessel and feel led to give, you can do so through our website as well. We thank you for your support and hope to see you on a Sunday morning at either our 8:30 or 10:15 service. I look forward to seeing you soon.